But what we've seen over the last couple days is that the only people allowed to go into businesses are the looters. The only people allowed to go inside the churches are the arsons. Right? There are people who've tried to burn churches to the ground, and they get away with it. But God forbid someone tries to go into a church to pray, they'd be vilified. I mean, there are states all across this country where people are still prohibited from even going into businesses or restaurants. It makes absolutely no sense, and it's absolutely infuriating.
Some technical. There we go. Max, can you hear me?
Yeah. So we
right.
had some technical difficulties.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, but as I was saying, the fact that the only people allowed to go into churches seem to be arsons. The only people allowed to go into businesses seem to be the looters. I mean, there are still businesses that are being forced to stay closed. And these politicians are talking out of both sides of their mouths. They're claiming that it's too dangerous for business owners to open. They're claiming it's too dangerous for conservatives, Republicans, to assemble. And in the next sentence, the next breath, they're supporting liberals out there protesting. I don't get it. I don't get it at all. When conservatives were protesting for the right to regain their livelihoods, we covered this on the show. They were called terrorists. They were called selfish. They were called grandma killers just for going outside. Now those same politicians are actually supporting these protesters, which regardless of whether you think these protests are legitimate or not, can we talk about the hypocrisy of it? That all of a sudden COVID-19 is gone. The lockdowns are gone. No more body slamming protesters to the ground like we saw in New York when someone protested against the lockdown, right? No more arresting people for peaceably assembling and saying they want their livelihoods back. No more fining people for daring to cut hair on the state house grounds like we saw in Michigan. We have state houses around this country that have been burned, vandalized, windows broken. And these people aren't being called terrorists. It's absolutely infuriating. And I don't know. It's just, I knew that this was political from the start, but the fact that the coronavirus lockdown has disappeared this quickly, it just cements it for me.
Right.
These lockdowns have been political from the start. The fact that they're picking the winners and losers, and once again, only the liberals are the winners in this. The conservatives still have to be the losers.
Well, I mean, I do want to tell you that there's liberals, there's conservatives that are protesting. I think that the agendas that are being pushed in the media through the protest has more to do with the idea that it's being whitewashed to just liberals, right? That this is a liberal cause. It's not. This is a universal cause. Like what is happening, and the shame is that it hasn't happened before now, right? That's the real shame. The shame is that we haven't had a conversation about corruption in police departments and good police officers standing up to bad police officers. We haven't had that conversation, and we should have been having it for the last 30, 40 years, if not longer. We're not having that conversation. So this is not a liberal. These protests are not just a bunch of liberals, right? It is I think universal across the board.
Yeah, no,
I
I understand that there are conservatives out there, but when you see Black Lives Matter walking through the streets, that is not a conservative protest. Conservatives can support the cause,
right,
but that is not a conservative protest.
And I guess that's what I'm saying is that it's been hijacked, Max. I mean, it's been hijacked by an ideology, not by what's really happening. So the fact of what happened is that George Floyd died, that a cop put his knee on his neck and on his back, and after he was dead, he still stayed on his neck. That happened, right? So
did you see, though? Did you see the news that he had coronavirus?
No.
In his autopsy, postmortem, he tested positive for at least the antibody. So he had coronavirus. So I want to know, is he going to be listed as a COVID-19 fatality? We've talked about this on the show. People have been shot and killed, and they were listed as a COVID-19 fatality. He had COVID-19. We know that does damage to people's lungs. He was suffocated. It is not hard to say that obviously he was killed by that police officer, But by the left's own logic, by the standards that we have been told have to be applied, he should be a COVID-19 fatality. He suffocated having recovered from COVID-19. He lost lung function as a result.
Right.
I mean, where is that in this? He had COVID-19. He was walking around, right? I don't think he should have been killed, obviously. But I look at what's happening, and there are people out walking without a mask, and they're being applauded. Like, remember the nurse in Denver who stood in front of the cars and put his hands on his hips and gave that little pouty face, and how that just became like a nationwide image.
Right.
Today, the nurses are out applauding the protesters.
Well, I mean, look, none of it makes sense, Max. I mean, we're not talking about something that makes sense. But what is worse about this not making sense part? What's worse about it is that small businesses, medium businesses, businesses that are owned by people in your community, they're still being shut down. Variances are still across the board in Colorado and other states not coming through for those businesses. But you can go protest, and governors are saying that protesting is an essential activity, right?
Yeah.
Where is this essentialness of a business being able to operate?
And where is the essentialness of the protests of business owners demanding the ability to open? Right? You were at those protests. You were vilified. You got hate mail. You got threatening calls just for helping organize the protests. Joe, if you were doing that same organization or organizing for a Black Lives Matter rally, instead of being threatened, you'd be applauded. Let's call a spade a spade. This whole thing has been a sham. There was absolutely no reason for this lockdown. We've gone through it. But they only enforced it when conservatives wanted to go outside. The minute that liberals wanted to go out and protest for what they cared about, they were allowed to do it. And
100%.
Governor Polis in Colorado was just out this week saying that obviously the stay-at-home order is still in effect. But obviously, if your conscience demands it, then protest is an essential activity. Where was that when people were at the Capitol protesting, demanding that they be allowed to earn a living, put food on their table?
They're still destroying businesses. They're still doing it now. They still don't care. They're still operating as if there's no urgency. There's no urgency for businesses. And the same issue could be said for schools and churches. I mean, you want to see a pandemic, I'm going to tell everyone right now, you want to see a pandemic, I'm going to tell you what the next pandemic it is. It's going to be mass suicides by kids who are being kept out of school. That is going to happen. Count on it. Count on it. I haven't been wrong yet.
It's already starting, and we predicted that we were going to see a rise in suicides. There are hundreds of counties across this country that have reported more suicides in the past couple months than COVID-19 fatalities. And we want, and liberals demand that we talk about privilege. Talk about privilege as people are killing themselves. Predominantly white people. Suicide is a predominantly white phenomenon.
I don't think you're right.
You can take that to the bank.
I don't
white
think you're
people
right.
More than any other. Yes, the majority of suicides are white people. You can take that one to the bank. Because I've been looking at this, people are telling me to check my privilege at the door. You see the videos of people being told to bow down and kiss people's feet? There was a video yesterday of this black guy telling a white woman to bow down and kiss his feet and apologize for the oppression. What the hell? And I'm still waiting to be able to go outside again. If I had a Black Lives Matter sign, I'd be welcome out in the streets. Joe, today my wife went into her OBGYN appointment to find out the gender of our new baby. We're having a boy. I wasn't allowed to be there. It was deemed too dangerous for me to sit next to my wife and find out the gender of our new child. I had half an idea to go there and drag the ultrasound machine out into the street and call it a protest, because then I'd be allowed to do it.
Well, if you would have brought a sign, you would have been able to do it.
Yeah, if I would have brought a sign, if I would have brought a Black Lives Matter t-shirt. No, this is serious. I'm pissed off because there's no reason for this. We've been lied to. We've been
100%.
Absolutely lied to.
100%.
And we're still being lied to. And now they're saying, oh, well, we might have to continue the lockdowns because people are out protesting. No, if it's okay for a looter to ransack a store, then it's okay for the business owner to open. And it's okay for me to go and buy things. I'm sick of it. I'm absolutely sick of it. There's no excuse for it. I'm fired up. I'm angry.
You are fired up. Normally it's me fired up, so I'm gonna let you stay fired up for a little bit.
No, I'm pissed because I should have been there.
Somebody
I should have been there to be able
me a
to be able
fire
to hold.
extinguisher. Max is on fire. I need a fire extinguisher. And aisle 6, please. Oh, aisle 6 is shut down.
I should have been there. I should have been there to find out the gender of my baby, and I had to learn that through a text message because it was too dangerous. Even though I have no symptoms, it's ridiculous. It's a ridiculous argument.
Are you having a boy or a girl?
Having a boy. Yeah,
all right.
Having a new boy. Yeah, I know. It's
right.
exciting, but that was robbed. I was robbed of that experience for absolutely no reason.
Well,
but if I want to go burn down the Alamo, there's going to be people applauding. There's going to be nurses out there applauding me if I want to go try and burn down the Alamo. It's disgusting. It's disgusting. And now we're being told that we're going to have to stay inside even longer because these idiots are out burning down the cities.
Well, hold on a second. Time out. They did have an article this morning that said, I'm trying to find it here real quick. They did that with all the pool parties and the protesters getting together, there's no new cases that have actually come out of that, new extreme cases that have come out of those engagements. So what we're starting to figure out is we're ignoring science. Now they're mum about science. I don't know if you even noticed that, but nobody's even talking about the science of coronavirus. They're not talking about the fact that
is Dr. Fauci. Dr. Fauci's nowhere.
Right. And the reality of it is we don't start actually letting people get back to their lives. This short-term problem that we've been facing is going to turn into a long-term, it could turn into a depression, right? I mean, you can see that the pulse of the economy does want to get back to normal because as the stranglehold from state to state gets lifted, we're starting to see that our economy is recovering very quickly, just as they predicted it would. But the longer we keep this in this place, the less likely that it will be that it will actually get back to normal.
Yeah, no, it's and Julia just wrote in, don't ever go back to the facility where your son was born. My son wasn't born. My wife was just having an ultrasound to find out his gender. So he wasn't born. I didn't miss the birth of my son. If they said I couldn't be there for the birth of my son, I'd be there in riot gear myself. So that's not going to happen. They're already trying to insinuate that I might not be allowed to be there. But that'll never happen. But it's just unbelievable how many lives have been ruined. I don't consider my life ruined. I hate that I had to miss that moment. I hate that I had to miss that moment for nothing. But you're outside protesting and it's all okay. It's A-okay. I gotta calm down. We gotta go to a clip. I want to talk about this. This is the governor.
I didn't even want to say anything. I'm just going to sit here and let you just go just go at it. Go at it, Max.
Yeah. I got to give myself a second. The governor of Missouri this week declared that he cannot guarantee it will be safe enough for the GOP. No, not Missouri. Sorry, North Carolina. The governor of North Carolina declared this week that he cannot guarantee it will be safe enough for the GOP to hold their convention in the state. And he sent them a letter. Let's throw that letter up on the screen, Josh. The image. So I'm not going to read it, but that's the letter on the governor of North Carolina's letterhead telling the GOP that they can't guarantee that they'll be able to have the convention because they don't know what kind of social distancing requirements will be in effect. Whether people will have to wear masks, right? They say it's too dangerous just to have a convention with a bunch of conservatives
but nobody's dying.
Shoulder.
Nobody's dying.
But nobody's dying.
Nobody's dying. Nobody. Right now, we are faced with nobody dying. The hospitals are empty, right? I don't know if you saw this, but two of the hospital networks, one in Chicago, one based out of Chicago and one based out of New York, have declared or are declaring bankruptcy. That'll happen this week or next week. They're predicting those networks, billion-dollar networks, that are going to go bankrupt as a result of their hospital.
It's a pandemic. It's a pandemic, and hospitals are going bankrupt.
Yeah.
But this letter, Joe, would you believe that the same day the governor, Roy Cooper of North Carolina, sent this to the GOP, would you believe that same day he was out marching with protesters without a mask on? Would you believe me if I told you that?
I would believe it. I would believe it.
All right, let's go to that cut. Let's go to cut one.
You ordered us to get the National Guard out of here.
Why'd you come out today, Governor Cooper?
Governor Cooper, why did you
Thank you
come
all.
out today?
I came out to tell you how much I appreciate the
Thank you, but why did you call the National Guard in, Governor?
Thank you all for being here.
Governor Cooper,
Really
we're thankful
appreciate
for being here, but why is the National Guard here?
Thank you for your help. Thank you for
You
your
still
help.
haven't
He's
answered our
ignoring
question,
her.
Governor.
He's ignoring the
We
question.
thank you, but why is the National Guard here, sir? Why is the National Guard here?
So that was him marching
That
with
was
protesters. Didn't go
marching
that
with
well.
protesters. What's that?
But it didn't go that well. That was him marching.
Right.
Did you hear what he said, though? Thanks all for being here.
Yeah.
A bunch of liberals were out marching shoulder to shoulder. He said, thanks all for being here. But that same day, he sent a letter to the GOP saying they're not welcome because it's too dangerous. This is what I mean when the lockdown only applies to conservatives. When it's too dangerous for the GOP to assemble, but he's literally out marching shoulder to shoulder with liberals. I don't want to hear it. This man's a fraud. He's a liar. We're seeing this across the country. We're seeing this in Minnesota where they're handing out masks. And last week they were threatening to arrest business owners who opened too quickly. It makes no sense.
Yeah, I don't, Max. I think we've stopped realize, or we've started to realize that nothing is going to make sense. It's not going to make sense, right? It's not. This is an establishment. This is the deep state that we talk about in government and how they're all connected. They all want to create something for themselves. This chaos benefits one group of people, right? And that's government workers and politicians. That's who it benefits. They could talk out of both sides of their mouth. They conveniently forget about things that they've said before, and they do the contradiction you're seeing now, where on one side he's out without a mask, protesting, not answering questions, by the way. On the other side of it, he's saying, "Hey, you guys can't meet. This specific group cannot meet." Right?
Yeah, but this one can. Thanks all for being here. Thanks, y'all.
Yeah. Well,
It's naked. It's out in the open. They're not even pretending. They're not even pretending to be equally administering justice or having everyone follow the same rules.
well, there's a lot of tone
Republicans,
deafness
you're not invited. Liberals, thanks y'all for being here.
Yeah. But
What am I missing?
well, I mean, I think the more that we actually walk through this pandemic and now the protests, I think that part of the reason why we've transitioned from the pandemic to the protests is that if you go back to the pandemic and now we start asking more questions, like how many people actually died of COVID-19? How many actually died? Right? Because in Colorado, they adjusted down the numbers. Now they adjusted down the numbers in, I think, 3 other states. Right? So how many people have actually died from COVID? And then you have the CDC that puts out information saying that, hey, by the way, we said that it stayed on hard surfaces. Now we were just kidding. It doesn't actually stay on hard surfaces. So if we can concentrate over here on the protest, we can go back in time and we can start whitewashing and or reinventing history so that they don't look as bad. And yet the people are forgetting all about it, Max. They're forgetting all about it.
Yeah.
Now everyone's concentrating on the protests. They're not even concentrating on the fact that, hey, my community is burning down. Well, now it's burning down a little less, I guess, or a little more, I guess, because now they're looting and taking away opportunities from businesses.
Oh yeah.
And by the way,
remember last week? Remember last week when they said that hydroxychloroquine, when the WHO said hydroxychloroquine is too dangerous, that no one is allowed to take it anymore. They're shutting down all of the studies on hydroxychloroquine. Well, the WHO this week restarted those studies.
Right.
And do you want to know why? It's because the company behind that data, that supposed data set of 1,000 hospitals around the world that proved that the hydroxychloroquine was killing more people than the placebo. That's what they were claiming. It turns out that company, Surgisphere, is a fraud. It has something like 3 to 6 employees, and the actual data set that was put out there was put together by a fantasy fiction author, and an adult model. Those are 2 of their 6 employees.
Yeah.
They lied. It was a complete lie. Just to try and make Trump look bad. Just because he's trying to promote a drug that all of the legitimate data at the time suggested that this is probably going to help people. right? Dr. Fauci suggested during SARS that this would be helpful to treat people who have coronaviruses. It was only when Trump actually promoted it that there was
and
this
took it.
wide,
He not only
and took it.
he was taking it.
Trump stopped taking it the same day that the WHO said it's too dangerous to take. It's everywhere. They've politicized this. They couldn't impeach Trump. They impeached Trump and ignored the virus. While Trump was trying to stop the virus, they were impeaching him. When impeachment didn't work, they tried to get him for the virus. Now that the American people are waking up and saying, okay, this is actually just like a really bad flu. The CDC says you have 2.5 in 1,000 odds of getting the coronavirus and dying. That's what the CDC says. That's the odds of passing away from the coronavirus. 2.5 in 1,000. Do you know what the odds of a black man dying from the police in his lifetime are, Joe? 1 in 1,000. We're looking outside, and even the best odds that the CDC have given us that basically says it's just a bad flu. You're more likely to die from a flu, to die from coronavirus, than a black man is to be shot by the police in their lifetime. Joe, last year, I don't know if you were watching Fox News last night. Tucker Carlson went through it. 10 black unarmed people were shot and killed last year by police. He went case by case. In 2 of those cases, the police were prosecuted for it. And in half of them, it was deemed justified. Absolutely. And we have people out there saying that there's a genocide, saying that every day, that's the claim, that every day black people are being shot and killed by the police. Listen, if that was true, I'd be out there protesting too.
Well,
if there was truly a genocide.
I don't believe there's a genocide, but I do want to stop you when it comes to this being a systemic problem, right? There's a systemic problem that bad police officers are not brought to justice. They're just not, right? There is a separate set of rules for police. Okay, so
that could be true.
So the protest itself, maybe, and this is where we get into foreign actors or bad actors or people that have hijacked the protests. And by the way, they've hijacked the Black Lives Matters movement. I mean, there's a political ideology that has overtaken what that was supposed to stand for back when it started in 2012. Right? They've hijacked it. That's what the left does. They hijack things that really do have meaning, that really do mean something, right? But I'm going to tell you from a person whose brother was murdered by the police 3 years ago. Now, my brother made bad choices, right? He made bad choices. But the police they didn't know at the time that he had a brother like me that was going to go through the process of investigating what happened, right? And they act with impunity because they have immunity. They act with impunity because they cannot police themselves. We have a police issue. We have a problem, Max. We do. And by the way, it's not just the police.
Last year was the best year to be a black man in America since they started keeping track of the statistics. That's just a fact.
It doesn't, but we do. I want you to look at this. I want to be the arbiter of your reality here. Okay, I want to be the arbiter of your reality because it's affected my family in many, many ways. First of all, my family is interracial, right? I have a very diverse family, and so from my standpoint, I've gone through more things related to racism, related to police brutality. I've seen it in my own family. So even if only one black man died, or 2 or 3, right? There's 5,000 behind them that may have been on the brink of death, may have been beaten, may have been thrown in jail and kept there for 3 or 4 days for charges that were never filed. That stuff happens. So this is an extreme version. What happened with George Floyd is an extreme version of the lack of empathy and the lack of respect, humanity that police officers and those police officers should have had for George Floyd, right? But it's a systemic issue in that there are a lot of really good police officers. There's a lot of them. There's many more good police officers than there are bad, right? But the bad police officers, they've got to find a way to give the good police officers enough ceiling, right, to be able to hold the bad police officers accountable. And that system has never been there. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that the loony left, the far, far left, hijacks events like this, right, and puts us in a position where You know, you can't ever get to a solution. We're finally at a place, though, that I think 90% of America agrees George Floyd should not have died. He shouldn't have died.
He shouldn't have died.
And
He shouldn't
the
have died. But
police
it's not just the loonies who are taking this over. Yesterday, the mayor of Los Angeles announced that he was cutting between 100 million and 150 million in funding from the police department.
Right.
They're cutting the police's funding. Like, oh, we want you to be better police officers. And oh, by the way, we're going to make you go into every encounter with one hand tied behind your back. Right? So California is facing a budget crisis, apparently. Right? But no, they're going to take all this money and throw it into community programs, which is great. Right? But what they don't also tell you is that while they're cutting the funding for police, they're giving funding, literal checks in the mail to illegal aliens. Right? It's insane.
It is insane, Max, but we solve one problem at a time. Get to the root of the problem, not the symptom of the problem. Right? It's a symbol.
Hollywood Boulevard was looted up and down, and the response is to cut the police's budget?
Well, I mean, if you look at
that's what they're advocating.
But
that's number one on their list of demands.
But the loony
defund
left,
the police.
But the loony left, they can't see it, Max. And remember what we said before. I mean, I truly believe that there's 10% on both sides. Far, far, far right, far, far, far left. I think if we put them all in a boat and sunk it, we'd all be a lot better off. Right? Oh, you're advocating for violence. Maybe. Because right now we can't get to the root of the problem. It's really simple. I want to see police officers held accountable. I want to make sure that if a police officer does something to a citizen in their community that they're there to protect and serve, right? That it doesn't take 4, 5, 6, 7 months for them to get arrested. It doesn't take a public outcry, right, and the media to bring it to light in order for us to get justice. Justice should be blind.
Justice
should happen.
Should be blind.
It should
Justice
happen.
Should be blind. But Joe, since what's the year? Since 2013 to 2019, there have been 2,900 white people who were shot and killed by police while holding a weapon. The number of African Americans armed who were shot and killed by police was 1,600. When you get into unarmed, the number of black people unarmed who were killed by police from 2013 to 2019 was 336. Horrible numbers. Number of white people who were killed by police, unarmed, shot and killed, 452. When you take out the violent crime aspect to us, you are more likely to be killed by police if you are white than if you are black. Taking out the violent crime, when you equalize for violent crime in the statistics, because the reason that
okay, but here's the part you're not getting. You missed this part of the statistic. And I love arguing with you on this because I think it's a good conversation. But there are more white people in the U.S. than there are black people. So they only represent about...
Yes, and that's why I said we equalize for the violent crime. The reason that black people make up the majority of the people in our prison system is not because everyone who arrests them is a racist. It's because African Americans statistically commit a higher percentage of the violent crime in this country.
Well, that's because they have less opportunity and there's less hope in their communities. And they're being kept down by subsistence and just feeding them barely enough to get by. Where the only hope that a black man in this country or black woman in this country has is athletics. Like I need to go become a pro athlete because that's my way out of this community, right? The schools are, Max, this is where we can actually start getting into the root of it, right? You know, in Denver, the high schools in Denver County, which is predominantly minority based, do you know how many of those have air conditioning in the high schools? Do you know how many? None.
Yeah.
None. But they built a $3 billion building downtown, right, called the Wellington Webb Building. And you know how many of those offices have air conditioning? Every last one of them. So look,
I want to know how that is a Republican issue.
It's not a Republican issue. But I mean, I think
Colorado has a Democrat governor, had 2 in a row. Denver has a Democrat mayor. The school system is run by Democrats on the school board. Even if they run as unaffiliated, there are Democrats on the school board. At every single point in that decision-making process, there are Democrats rubber stamping the decision not to put air conditioning into inner city schools.
Right.
I don't want to hear that one person died in Minneapolis and now it's okay to riot because there's no air conditioning in a school.
It's never okay
Like-
to riot, but I'm trying to get to a conclusion here. I'm trying to show you why is there a higher crime rate in a inner city? Well, it's really easy. There's no opportunity. There's no hope, right? And then you stack that on top of each other that the police in some instances treat people in their community poorly, inhumanely. And it makes it very difficult for when you see that happening around you all the time. I only use the air conditioning as a example of the fact that there's no priorities towards minority-based communities. There just isn't. There's lots of organizations, right? But they're frustrated.
That looks like more of an issue. That looks like more of an issue of priorities in education funding, because I bet you I can point to high schools in Appalachia, in Tennessee and Kentucky that have predominantly white student bodies that also don't have air conditioning. Right? That doesn't seem to be a racist thing that the white schools get air conditioning and the black schools don't. That seems like more of an overall education funding policy.
Right.
Than that. I mean,
Well,
I can point.
but it's not.
There are schools in Texas that don't have it.
It's the ethos. It's the culture that we've created as a country. And I got out. I have done very well, right? My family, as a result of that, has done well. I've been a good example for my nieces and nephews. I've done things to help my family, right? But I'm going to tell you, there is a large amount of opportunity that is stripped away from minority-based environments. It just is, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that the rioting is right and the looting is right? And those are bad actors. Those are the far left. Those are the people that are hijacking what should really be the conversation. They're hijacking it. But I'm telling you right now that if you want to have a conversation about why, right? Why are minorities, blacks? I'm going to say blacks. I'm not going to talk about Hispanic right now because, from a illegal being here illegally, they've been given much more preferential treatment in this country than blacks have. Right? But if you want to realize why they're upset, is that there are a lot of, and I want to say a lot, there are a lot of innocent black men, specifically, in prison right now. There are a unequal amount of sentencing, right? It's unequally yoked. If you're a white man, you will get 3 years, right, for a crime. If you're a black man, do the same crime, you will get 10 years.
I have sympathy. I have sympathy for the notion that in policing, in the justice system, that people's biases and stereotypes and stereotyping people come into play when determining sentences. But if your goal is to stop the stereotyping, the last thing that black people should be doing right now is running out and burning down businesses and burning down churches and looting stores and smacking police officers in that back of the head with a brick. Right? These are legitimate conversations to have, but maybe the timing's horrible because it's really hard to make the argument that it's a genocide when I just went through the numbers that Tucker Carlson went over last night. 10 unarmed black people were killed in 2019.
Right.
Only 5, half of them, roughly, I think it was like half of them, were unarmed, but they were also attacking the police officer. They were just doing it unarmed. Right? We are not experiencing an epidemic in black men needlessly being shot and killed every day. It isn't there. I will fight injustice wherever it exists. I will stand shoulder to shoulder wherever it exists. But do not tell me that we have to defund the police department because 10 black people were killed unarmed last year. It's horrible. It's horrible. But when you actually go through the data, it is not a genocide. And you know what? We shouldn't have to be having this discussion. Any loss of life should be worthy of protest.
Yeah.
But as I said yesterday, if George Floyd was white, we wouldn't even know his name.
No.
We wouldn't even know his name. Joe, can you name any of the 452 unarmed white people who were killed in the last 6 years?
Yeah.
Can you name any of them?
I can. My brother.
Well, no, he was not shot and killed by police.
Yeah. Okay. He wasn't
Unarmed.
shot and killed, but he was knocked into a wall, hit a pole, broke his neck, and died at 90 miles an hour.
I'm talking about people who are
On a
shot and killed
motorcycle.
by police.
Over a
People who are
traffic
shot and
stop.
killed by police and they're unarmed.
But what I'm saying
I
is
cannot
if
name
you
a
start-
single. I cannot name a single person.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I can't either. But the reality of it is that we have to get to the problem. We have to start talking about the problem, and we got to start communicating interracially, right? I can have a conversation with anyone. Chinese, Barney the purple dinosaur with web feet. Yeah, I can have a conversation with him. Right? For me, I fit and feel comfortable around everyone, right? But we've got to be able to come together. We got to lay aside some of these political, ideological kind of stigmatisms that have been put on us, right? That these badges or these scarlet letters, set them aside and start talking about the 10% that are the bad actors on the left and the right. We have to publicly denounce it as a community that, hey, you're a part of my community. I really don't care, how you feel. I will respect the fact that you have a different belief system when it comes to abortion. Now, I'm not going to stop fighting because I'm pro-life. I'm never going to stop fighting to be pro-life, and I'm not going to stop fighting for the rights of the unborn. I'm just not going to do it. It doesn't mean that I can't respect someone that has a pro-choice ideology, but if we can set all of that stuff aside and start solving problems in our community, right? I mean, literally addressing things like this George Floyd deal. George Floyd is a direct correlation to the frustration and things that have happened to everyone of color. I mean, everyone of every color, right? Of every race, of every religion. We face bad cops. Bad cops are bad cops, right?
George Floyd he shouldn't have died. But I want to know how the fact that he was high on fentanyl and methamphetamine at the same time, how that contributed to his death. I want to know how coronavirus contributed to his death. We've been fed the story that he was choked out. The initial autopsy said that he wasn't asphyxiated. Now they're saying he was. The initial autopsy said it was the link between his heart condition, and the intoxicants in his system. Now we know those intoxicants were caffeine, fentanyl, and methamphetamine. Mm-hmm. And that the stress, listen, the last autopsy that was done, they didn't even get to look at the entirety of his heart because it had been taken out in the first autopsy.
Right.
There's a lot of questions. I have a lot of questions that I want answered before I hold George Floyd up. And that's not saying he should have died. He shouldn't have died. But I have a lot of questions that still haven't been answered.
All right, but here's the reality. If he wouldn't have had a knee in the back of his neck, he'd still be alive. Now, all the other stuff could have contributed to a lot of things, but there's no justification for his death. You can't justify the fact that he died. We can't. We can't sit here and look. I watched Tucker Carlson and I listened to what he said, and even he said he shouldn't have died. That should be the end of the conversation. That should be the end. Do we have a problem, Max? Well, no. Let me ask you a question. Do we have a problem? Do we have a problem with police corruption? All right, forget police corruption.
There's absolutely police corruption. There's absolutely police corruption.
Let's lay aside the police corruption part and let's ask this question: do we have corrupt politicians? Do we have corrupt?
Yes,
do we have a problem?
Listen, if there was an epidemic of racist police officers all across the country unnecessarily killing black men, then last year there would have been more than 10 unarmed black men shot and killed by police. That's a fact. If this was epidemic levels, if we're talking about systemic racism,
but it's not.
Like the system itself.
But it's not. We can agree.
But when you say systemic, systemic racism, what that's saying is the very system itself. The very idea of the police is killing black people. And listen, again,
I didn't
anyone
say that.
who's unnecessarily
I said
killed,
we have a systemic issue. I did not say that. I didn't say that.
The root word for systemic is the system itself.
The system is a problem.
To say something systemic,
it is
to say something
there is a systemic problem.
It's all including.
It absolutely is, Max. It absolutely is. I'm saying that that there is a systemic amount of racism. The system itself is systemically racist. Right, predominantly, and if that's not true,
I disagree.
Okay, but if it's not true, then why are black men being incarcerated at a time of 3 to 4 times that of a white person that has committed the same crime? Why?
So that's an issue when it comes to judges and juries. If we're going to talk about police, the reason that they're arrested is because the violent crime rate among the black community is larger than among the white community.
You know what we have a problem.
That's a fact.
You know our problem is that we don't have control of our country anymore. The government has gotten so big that the government controls what we do as people, right? We now are sharecroppers and slaves. And if I was driving a big circle about how we do these podcasts every day, when we talk about this every day, we come back to the fact that the government now does not serve the people. The people serve the government. The government has become basically a kingdom. They can do whatever they want. They have stacked laws so deep that the oppression that you could feel as a human being is absolutely astronomical. It's astronomical.
So I can point to evidence that we have a systemic problem that police officers are pulling people over for speeding and writing them tickets that they shouldn't be writing. I can point to data that exists to show that police officers are
100%.
writing tickets to make money, right? I can point to that data, right? I can also point to data of them unnecessarily arresting people that shouldn't happen, right? We can point to that data. I cannot point to data that police officers all across the country at epidemic, systemic levels are shooting black people for no reason. That data just doesn't exist.
Does it have to be just shooting? Can we talk about the ones that don't shoot? Can we talk about the bad police officers that beat people?
Well, listen. If I come in with data, you can't just say, "Well, I want to look at different data." The data of the shooting, the police officers have guns on them. The majority of people who are killed by police officers are killed using their guns, right? That's just a generic data set that we can use here, right? If you can show me that black men are just being gunned down the street, I have sympathy for people who claim that they're driving and they're pulled over just because they're black. I have extreme sympathy for that, right? When I see a cop in my rearview mirror, though, I'm anxious too, and I haven't done anything wrong. I'm just as anxious. So I don't want to get pulled over either. No one wants to get pulled over. I have tremendous sympathy for people who get pulled over and they're pulled over repeatedly and they're black and they haven't done anything wrong. I hear those arguments, but the argument that cops are just running around this country and just shooting black men for no reason, it just isn't there. And that's the problem I have. If you want to point to real data and say this is a real problem that is systemic, not just one bad cop in Minneapolis, Minnesota, who put his neck on someone and killed him. Horrible. I agree, horrible. If you can point to how that's happening everywhere, and you can show me a pile of bodies that we didn't even know about, of black people just being killed everywhere, I'll fight that fight with you. But the problem is that they're making an argument that isn't true. They're saying that this is happening every day.
No.
They're saying this is happening every week, and it's just not true.
Bad actors that are hijacking what the real problem is to create chaos for their own benefit are the ones that are saying that. That's the narrative they're creating, right? But if you were to have a conversation, I got a conversation with my brother yesterday, and we had a conversation about he went to the protest, and he goes, "Look, Joe, I had to stand in front of someone that was holding a big rock," and I was like, "What? Tell me about that." He goes, "I stood in front of him and told him I was going to beat him up if he actually threw the rock." And you have to know, you have to know my brother to know that that he would do that. But he said, look, we're here to protest the problem. And the problem is a lack of accountability. There's no accountability. They act with impunity because they have immunity. And he goes, Joe, that's the best words you could actually say. We could put that on a sign and put it out there. Right? If we could just address that, if we could just address the issue that there's no accountability and that there is no double check system for the community. The community, and again, there's so many more good police officers than there are bad. There's so many more. It's like 99% that are
systemic.
great. No, but it is. Hold on, it is. And let me tell you about the systemic part of it. It permeates all the way through the DA's offices, the judges, right? That if you're a black man and you're arrested and you go for sentencing, you're getting a punishment that is 4 times that on average, 3.91 times average of what it is for a white man, right? That's an actual, that's truth. That shows you that we're talking about, you want to talk about and focus in on people dying, on black men dying.
It's impossible. It's impossible to make both arguments. It's impossible to say that it's only a few bad actors, but it's also a systemic problem. You can say that they're cancerous. You can say that they're cancerous, but when you argue that it's systemic, you're basically saying the cancer's metastasized and it's taken over the whole body. That's what it means when you say systemic. That it's far-reaching across the entire system. It's not just a few bad apples. You're actually arguing that the few bad apples have spoiled the bunch. That's the challenge. And Josh, I know that there are people trying to call in.
Yeah.
Are our phones down right now?
No, they are calling in, and we had somebody call in, but we couldn't put them on because we have a technical issue at this point.
All right, well, we're trying to get those worked out. No, but that's the issue, Joe. It's that you can't have it. You can't say that it's a few bad apples and then say it's also systemic. Those are two very different arguments, right? And as I'm saying, the data does not suggest that all across this country, innocent black men are just being gunned down in cold blood. And are there racists on police forces? Absolutely. Are there people being pulled over unnecessarily by white police officers, and most likely the only crime that they're committing is driving while black? That's the argument. I believe that that's the case. I believe that there are police officers who abuse their power that way.
Well,
Just like they abuse their powers in
how
other
many
ways.
people do you think bad police officers arrest? I mean, related to
don't know.
good police officers.
Probably tens of thousands every year.
I mean, so
More probably. I don't know.
It's got to be more, right? I mean, because just look at it. I mean, just look at the entire system, right? It's not. Again, we have to look at the landscape holistically. Just look at the whole thing, and there's just stacking amounts of pressure, right, and frustration that start building because the opportunity isn't there. They're not treated the same way, not even in the schools. Now, if you get outside of the Democrat-controlled areas, and I'll use Colorado again because I'm here, if you get outside of those Democrat-controlled areas in Denver, the schools don't have air conditioning, and you get to the suburbs, right, which are predominantly conservative in Colorado, how many of those schools do you think have air conditioning?
I don't know. Josh, they're
All
saying
of
that
them.
they can't hear me on the stream. Make sure my the volume's turned up. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how many don't have air conditioning. Again, if a school doesn't have air conditioning or doesn't have heat, that's an issue of like budgeting, right? That it's not racist white people's fault that next to none of the schools in Baltimore, for example, have heat. That's not racist's fault. That's the Baltimore City Council and the actual budget that they've set forward, right? So I don't want to conflate these things. These are budgetary issues.
But what I'm saying is that they're not budgetary issues if you're spending $3 billion on a new building downtown, right? That's not a budgetary issue. That's a matter of priorities as a community. And when I get back to it again, I keep coming back to the fact that we as Americans have to take our country back, right? We have to take it back. We've been talking about it for years, holding the government accountable, making sure that they're accountable for their behavior, right? There's no gap between shoulder to shoulder, me and any other person that wants to protest against what is happening with police officers, but it's a smaller part of the problem. The bigger part of the problem is that we have a government it's a runaway train. We have politicians that get away with lip service and talking and not actually doing anything. And we have people that should be running for office, unselfishly serving their communities, that don't get an opportunity to unselfishly serve their communities because the establishment on both sides gets to dictate whose turn it is. Hey, you're going to run for this office. You're going to run for this office. We don't want you to run for this office. We're not going to support you. We're not going to give you adequate funding so that you can actually win this race. We're going to make sure that we put our guy or gal in the driver's seat in these particular races. That's what's happening. We have a government that is completely off the rails. And we're now calling out one part of the problem, one part of it. Now we know that one problem is, can we start talking holistically about all the problems? Like all the problems that we're dealing with that all come back to one thing: bad leadership, corrupt leadership.
Yeah, so here's the problem, Joe. You point to we can point to cities where black people are being killed by the police, and the police is being run by a black police chief. The district attorney is black.
Yep.
The mayor is black.
Yep.
The city council is predominantly
Yep.
black. You look at places like Baltimore,
Yep.
that's going on. So I don't want to hear that it's systemic racism when every single step of the way decisions are being made by black people. Like it's just a fact. And again, we can disagree that it's horrible. It's horrible that people are needlessly being killed by police, regardless of what color their skin is, what their creed is, what their ethnicity is. It doesn't matter. No one should be killed by the police if they've done nothing wrong. But I don't want to hear that it's a systemic problem when the data suggests that it isn't, because if it was a systemic problem, more than 10 black people would have been shot and killed by police, and of those, half of them were attacking the police officer or actively fleeing the scene of a crime, right? The data just isn't there. So you're talking about things that have actual tangible data to it, like inner city school funding, right? Things like that. We can have that discussion. But I'm going through the list of demands that they're actually demanding.
It's garbage. It's garbage. The demands are garbage.
They want to defund the police. They want to defund the police.
It's garbage.
They want
we would agree. We would agree
defund the police. They want to make
radical.
it illegal for a police officer. They want to make it illegal for a police officer ever to fire at a moving vehicle. Like, what? They want to, in Dallas, they want to stop police officers from deporting black immigrants from Haiti and African nations disproportionately. Like, these aren't real things. None of this is real. If we want to talk about real cases, real examples of racism in policing that we can fix, let's do it.
Well,
but as long as the target is made up, right? We cannot stop police officers from, like, if there's no genocide, we can't prevent a genocide, right?
Let me ask you a question. Let me ask you a question. Who do you think benefits if there's chaos in things like this? Who do you think it benefits? I'm going to tell you, our runaway train, the government, because then nothing gets done. Nobody moves the cheese.
It benefits the idiots like Sharpton, who've made their livelihoods off of collecting checks for problems that they have no intentions of actually fixing. Right? That's who benefits.
They don't benefit because if you
Sharpton,
fix the problem, we don't need them anymore. Why do you think Black Lives Matter movement got hijacked? They recognized that it was actually going to make a difference. And so the loony left is like, wait a minute, let's hijack this movement and make it go a completely different direction. Let's create a political ideology under the skin of what we do for Black Lives Matter. And then all of a sudden, Black Lives Matter it becomes anemic. Right? And
you look at the Google Trends, Black Lives Matter as a keyword only trends in the months preceding an election. That is the only time that Black Lives Matter as a search term is pushed into the spotlight.
Right.
People only talk about Black Lives Matter in election years. It's just politicized.
They're weaponizing it, Max. Would you agree? I mean, they're weaponizing the media. They're weaponizing technology. They're doing everything that we keep talking about it. And if we can just settle down, if we can just... I know I'm mad. I'm mad about the lockdown because it's destroying people's lives. It's destroying people that are the most vulnerable among us, right? We can't see battered women, right? We can't see kids that are abused, right? We can't see it because there's no one that can put eyes on them, and they're in environments that are just bad, right? But if we can just settle down long enough to have a conversation about what truly is the thorn in the paw, right? That truly is the bad actor in this, it'll all come back to who benefits. Who benefits if Al Sharpton creates a huge amount of chaos over the George Floyd murder, right? Who benefits? He does, because we don't solve a problem, because he creates chaos, because that's what they're good at.
We can have that conversation. We can have the conversation, but as I said, there have to be real targets. Like, you can't say we need to have a conversation and stop racist police officers from murdering black people for no reason. Listen, if that's an epidemic in this country, I'm for that. But the minute I go and look for the data, the data doesn't support the argument.
Yeah.
So that's all I'm saying. If we're going to fix problems, let's identify real problems. I'm not saying that George Floyd dying isn't a problem. It is. But everyone who was responsible has already been indicted, has already been charged. They're behind bars. I think they have like $1 million bond. They're not getting out. That problem, they're going to get justice there one way or another. But you can't tell me that we have to have a conversation about all the other cases where this same incident's happening. And in the last year, you can only point to 10 instances. And as I said, half of them were either attacking police or fleeing from the scene of a crime. That's the problem. If we want to come in with real problems that are provable, I'll stand with you. But when we say, oh, no, it's systemic racism, and anytime something goes wrong, racism must be to blame for it, right? Like, there's not some racist Southern Confederate puppet master pulling the strings for the Denver public school system's budget. There just isn't, right? That budget is being written by black people. It is being implemented by black people. And listen, my wife taught in Denver public schools. So I understand. I understand the challenges they have. But you can't tell me that there's some old Confederate Civil War general or something up playing with the puppet strings. It's not there.
I don't believe that. But I do believe that if we don't solve the problem, if the problem is never solved, then we can keep having this conversation, talking about it. And what happens in government is we keep talking about it. We talk about it. They fail to implement, right? They fail to hold themselves accountable. They fail to actually make noticeable change. That when it gets back to, and everybody gets back to the normal life and they stop concentrating on it, the bad cops go back to doing what they're doing. At least now, I think that there's a universal, if anything, if the pandemic did anything, it brought to light the fact that there are massive amounts of disparities in government when it comes to control of the people, right? And they act with impunity. I think that everyone has figured it out, at least most smart people, right? And that the government has gotten too big and it's created, it basically is it's killing our people. It's killing the people that it's supposed to be protecting, right? And not by a pandemic, not by a virus. It's killing the people by economic suicide, right? So look, we're not going to agree. We're not going to agree on this because I lived it. So I lived in that environment. And so, and I think that it's really difficult for me to see is I hate seeing white people that walk down the street and they're the ones that are screaming at people, right? Screaming at the police about racism, and black people are more pragmatic about it. They really are, right? They realize it's an individual problem of racism, right? But that the government has adapted to, allowing a systemic. I don't know how you what you call it.
Listen, I don't want to belittle your experience. As you've said on the show in the past, you grew up in a mixed race family. Mm-hmm. Your parents are black, so I don't want to belittle that experience that you had. But you said something right now that I want to end on, and I want to actually end on this. You said that you lived it, which no one's denying that when you were living in the inner city, you experienced racism in effect. Joe, when did you move out of the inner city?
Well, I mean, a long time ago.
Okay.
30 years ago.
So 30 years ago. I have no doubt in my mind that 30 years ago, we could throw a dart at a dartboard, and if you had a different police officers facing that dartboard, I have no doubt in my mind, you threw a dart at it, you'd hit a cop that probably was a racist. I don't deny it. Like, you look at the 60s, 70s, 80s in our country, horrible things were done in policing. But that's not the case today, which is what I'm trying to bring to the front, because if you had an experience like that in the 60s, 70s, 80s, no one's denying it, right? The challenge is when they're basically presenting 2019, 2020 policing as if it's the Deep South in the middle of the civil rights movement, which it's not, right? We had systemic racism in this country. There's no doubt about it. We had it. I do not believe it exists now. Especially it does not exist in cities with black mayors, black district attorneys, and black police chiefs. I don't buy the argument. But if you can present the evidence of serious problems, I'm on board, right?
I can.
If you can say that racism caused black schools to not have air conditioning, all for it. Let's get them some AC. It's not a hard problem to fix. And it's not you doing it, it's other people when they're presenting the issue that every day, that's what they're saying, every day innocent black men are being killed in the streets. It just isn't true. Any final words?
No, I mean, I think we can end on that, and I will tell you that I didn't say that everyday innocent black
No, you didn't say that, but that's the argument that's being presented. Yeah, that's the argument being presented in the media.
It is, and it's a false argument, but every time we talk about the media, we're talking about how they're fake anyway. So, look, I just want people to come together and have a conversation about what's really going on. And if we can get to a place where we can add accountability to what we do in our communities, and we can have people that have the interests of their communities at heart running for office, right, and taking over these positions of leadership, we have a better chance of coming through this together. That's what I think we need to do.
Yeah, and I'm going to end on this and just reiterate how pissed I am that I was not there to be able to find out the gender of my son in person. It was disgusting. If I had a Black Lives Matter t-shirt on, they probably would let me in. But we're having a boy, and I'm happy about that. So now I can go get a nice beer and celebrate. But it's sorry if I was heated. I was coming into this with that anger. Well, that's going to be it for this edition of the Conservative Daily Podcast. Remember that you can download the podcast on the Apple Podcast, as well as the Google Play Store. You can also find us on the Podbean app, which more people are using lately, as well as conservative-daily.com/podcast. Please do subscribe to the show. You can find us live streaming on YouTube and Facebook now. So do watch it, do comment. We read the comments. And sorry today that the phones were down. We weren't trying to duck and hide from callers. Our phones were just down today. We're going to get them up and running for tomorrow. I promise you that. So again, my name is Max McGuire.
And this is Joe Otto.
And remember that the fight to take back our country isn't over, but the only way we win is if we all fight together.